Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolute ultimate toolkit to fix those frustrating photography failures and really push past the basics. Because honestly, even if you know your way around a lens, it is just amazing how dialing in one fundamental concept can completely elevate an image from, just good to absolutely breathtaking. You know the feeling, right? You line up what looks like a killer shot, but the result is just a blurry, dark mess. Meanwhile, somebody else's shot looks like a total professional masterpiece. Well, exploring the source material, it's actually fascinating to see how that difference almost always comes down to manipulating one core concept, and that is exposure. So what does this all mean? At its core, exposure is quite literally just the amount of light making its way into your camera. Specifically, it's the intensity of that light multiplied by the time it hits your digital sensor. But, and here's the catch, controlling that light to get that perfect aesthetic you're looking for requires balancing three very distinct pillars. Okay, let's quickly look at our roadmap for today. We are going to cover 1. Decoding photographic exposure, 2. Aperture, depth and light, 3. Shutter speed, capturing motion, 4. ISO, digital light sensitivity, and 5. Balancing the exposure triangle. All right, let's jump right into part 1, decoding photographic exposure. To really get this, let's start with a foundational, honestly brilliant metaphor that perfectly mirrors how this works. Capturing a properly exposed photo is remarkably similar to filling a glass of water. In this setup, the water is the light. The width of your faucet, that's your aperture. The time you leave it running is your shutter speed, and the size of the glass is your ISO. The ultimate goal here is to fill that glass perfectly. No dark underfilling, and definitely no overflowing into a blown-out mess. Moving right along to part 2, aperture, which is all about depth and light. Think about it like this. Our camera lenses are basically just mechanical versions of the human eye. Just like the pupil in your eye dilates in the dark to gather more light and then contracts in bright sun to protect your retina, the camera's aperture uses these little metal blades to open and close. It dictates exactly how wide our metaphorical water faucet is opened. Now, what's incredibly cool here is how tweaking your f-stop doesn't just change the brightness, it radically alters your depth of field. For example, a wide-open aperture like f1.4 just pours in the light, but it creates this shallow, beautifully creamy, blurry background. But if you close it down to a tiny pinhole, say f22, obviously less light comes in, but suddenly everything from the foreground all the way to the distant mountains is razor sharp. Okay, part 3, shutter speed and capturing motion. Next up is the shutter, which dictates how long our metaphorical faucet is left running. It's essentially a lightning-fast door blocking your sensor. A super fast shutter, like 1/1000th of a second, completely freezes a water droplet midair, but it cuts off the light really quickly. On the flip side, a slow shutter speed lets in way more light and creates this silky smooth motion blur. But you gotta beware here. Leaving it open too long means you might capture the unwanted blur from your own natural hand movement. I absolutely love this concept from our sources. They point out that with long exposure, light literally becomes your paintbrush. It totally changes how you view the camera. When you mount it on a tripod and just keep that digital door open, you're not just taking a quick snapshot. You are letting light paint the scene, whether that's capturing starlight or turning city traffic into flowing rivers of color. And here's where it gets really interesting for video. Cinematographers actually break standard shutter rules intentionally to mess with our psychology. Standard movies usually follow the 180-degree rule for a natural-looking blur. But take a movie like Saving Private Ryan. They used a hyper-fast shutter to eliminate blur entirely, giving us that chaotic, jittery, staccato battlefield feel. Conversely, The Wolf of Wall Street used a dragging, slow shutter to create a smeared, dizzying effect that perfectly simulated the characters' disoriented minds. It just shows that shutter speed is pure storytelling. Let's head into part 4, ISO, or digital light sensitivity. So we've made it to the final corner of our triangle. Now, it's interesting to note that while aperture and shutter speed are physical, mechanical, moving parts, ISO is entirely digital. Think of it as the size of our metaphorical water glass. A low ISO, like 100, is like a large measuring cup. It needs a lot of light to fill up, but it yields a beautifully clean image. Cranking it up to, say, 3200 is like swapping to a tiny shot glass. It fills up instantly when you're desperate for light in the dark, but the massive trade-off there is the heavy pixelation, digital noise, and grain that it introduces. Which brings us to our final section, part 5, balancing the exposure triangle.
Okay, let's look at how these three distinct elements function together, kind of like a perfectly balanced scale. Here is where the mathematical magic happens. We think of light in equal steps, or what photographers call stops. Say you're on setup A, but suddenly you need to freeze a speeding car. You double your shutter speed from 1/30th to 1/60th. Awesome, car is frozen. But wait, that just cut your incoming light in half. To maintain the exact same brightness, you just have to open your aperture by one equal step, from f4.0 to f2.8. Boom, the scale is balanced, but you've achieved a totally different creative look.
To actually pull this all off out in the real world, you don't have to just guess. You can rely on your camera's light meter and histogram as your visual guides to finding that sweet spot for even exposure. And honestly, if jumping into full manual still feels like a massive leap, semi-automatic modes are going to be your best friend. You can use aperture priority to just focus on dictating the depth of field, or shutter priority if you just want to freeze or blur motion, and simply let the camera calculate and do the heavy lifting for the rest. By demystifying these foundational tools today, we've shown that the days of relying on those unpredictable auto settings are officially over. You can now clearly see how light, depth, and motion all intertwine. So, with this toolkit ready to go, you have to ask yourself, which photographic rule are you going to creatively break first on your next shoot? Get out there, grab your camera, and let the light be your paintbrush. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.